Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the TrAIN Open Live event with Pablo Lafuente and Keyna Eleison. My name is Paul Goodwin. I'm the director of TrAIN, the Research Centre for Transnational Arts, Identity and Nation at the University of the Arts. TrAIN is a cross-disciplinary and cross-university research centre that investigates questions around the international, around questions of identity and nationalism in art and design. We're one of the oldest university research centres in this field, and our publications, exhibitions, international research projects, and public programme has played a huge part, we believe, in critiquing the impact of globalization in art and in deconstructing the myths and ideologies of colonial and nationalist approaches to art history. Now, the TrAIN Open is our flagship public lecture and now online event series. And this week, we're absolutely thrilled to have two fantastic guests, Keyna Eleison and Pablo Lafuente, who'll be speaking about their journey as co-artistic directors of the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And tonight's event is being moderated by Dr. Michael Asbury, and I'll introduce Michael in a minute. And Michael will then introduce our speakers and moderate the event. Before I do that, let me just quickly tell you about our next event that is coming up on the 17th of March. That is with artist Evan Ifakoya, called Frequency, Embodiment, and Melanin-ophobic Space, which I think will be a fantastic lecture, experimental lecture and listening session that will invite participation. You can see details about that on our TrAIN website. So if you Google TrAIN UAL, you'll find our website and all the details of all our events there. So Michael Asbury, who's a co-founder of TrAIN, is an Anglo-Brazilian art historian, art critic, and curator. He's currently a reader in the history and theory of art at UAL, where he's also, as I mentioned, deputy director of TrAIN and faculty member of the CCW Chelsea, Camberwell, and Wimbledon Graduate School. As an art historian, Michael has written extensively on Brazilian modern and contemporary art. And as an art critic, he's contributed to many journals such as Art in America, Art History, Art Nexus, Flash Art, Third Text, and many other art journals in Brazil as well, such as Porto Art, for example. He was an associate curator for Century City, Art in the Modern Metropolis, which was Tate Modern's inaugural temporary exhibition, and has curated over 20 exhibitions, many of which have really set the scene in this field in both Brazil and in Europe. So, Michael, can I hand over to you? I'm really looking forward to this fantastic event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I wasn't expecting such an extensive introduction, but thanks. Yes, as Paul mentioned, it's very exciting to have Keyna Eleison and Pablo Lafuente to speak with us. Could I just ask people to turn their cameras off, please? Because we're going to, it kind of interrupts with the viewing. Thank you. So we're very excited to have Keyna and Pablo with us. They have been recently appointed as joint artistic directors of the Museum of Modern Art in Rio, and this is really a new way of appointing directors. It was a kind of an open call. Usually in previous years, these appointments were made by direct appointments, not by an open kind of selection. So it's a kind of a new phase for the museum, and it's an incredibly important museum within the kind of history of Brazilian art from the mid 20th century till today. Some of the great exhibitions, the kind of great historic exhibitions, were held at the museum. It was also a very important art education center. Several kind of super important curators and art critics have been involved with the museum. Also amazing architecture by Eduardo Adolfo Reigi. in a fantastic location on the Guanabara Bay. So very exciting to have this new phase of the museum, and we're very kind of keen to hear a little bit about the plans for the programming designed by Keyna and Pablo. Keyna is a researcher and a teacher. She teaches at the Parque School, which is another super interesting place in Rio, but we won't go into that right now. It's kind of independent school of art. She contributes as a writer to journals such as Contemporary in Latin America, and she was the curator of the 10th edition of the biennial, the International Biennial of Art, C-Art, in Bolivia, and she was also a member of the campaign for the qualification for the Heritage Commission of the Cais do Valongo, the Valongo Cay, which is something that I would love to ask you, Keyna, later on if we have time about. So that's kind of my brief introduction to Keyna. Pablo is a very old colleague. He used to work at Central St. Martin's, UAL, and we've worked with supervised PhD students together. He's a curator, writer, researcher, and educator. He was the co-curator of the Jaguatapora exhibition of indigenous artworks and manifestations in Rio in 2017. At another interesting museum, the museum, the MA, the Museum of Art of Rio. He was also one of the curators of the 31st São Paulo Biennial in 2014. He's worked as associate curator for the Office for Contemporary Art in Norway, and as a reader, as I mentioned, at Central St. Martin's, where he was involved as an editor with After All and After All Books. Currently, he's a series editor for the exhibition history books, so he still maintains, although he's living in Brazil and in Rio for many years now, he still maintains a strong connection with the university. So without further ado, I will switch off my camera, and could I ask Robert Leckie if they could, I'm not sure if everyone's seeing that, but I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll have to do manage with that. So without further ado, I pass the microphone to you, Keyna and Pablo, and I'll switch off mine.
Hi.
Hello. Good afternoon or evening. Maybe.
Or evening, we don't know. Here is something around good morning almost.
Thank you very much for having us here, there. We're super happy to have the chance to talk to you. It's a good thing because, I mean, since we started in September, we don't really have many opportunities to sit down and talk, even to each other. I mean, we're joking this morning that
that I'm already missing him, because we start to think and dream around how can we work here together, because as you said, was an open call that we did together, and since we start, sometimes I miss him because I don't see him so much.
Yeah. We're in the same building, but not in the same room.
Yes.
And it's, I mean, we didn't quite know what things needed to be discussed in order to make sense, what kind of back histories needed to be shared, and we also didn't want to do something super formal, but we decided to go somewhere in between, and we hope it makes sense. And please, we are super happy to be interrupted with interpellations or questions whenever, but we thought, okay, let's do a mini presentation, we have a small slideshow. So we'll take some faces off the screen now, throw in some images, talk a bit about some background and some things we'd like to do, or even some things that we've already done. And then we can come back to the screen and respond to any, or we'll try to respond.
Yes, we can try. I don't know if we can respond to everything, but we can try. And it's very interesting because now we intend to do another things that we dreamed before. This is very important for us, because before Be Real, as artistic directors, we wanted to do many things that when we start, our dreams change a little. So we're still dreaming, still wanting, we're still intending to do many things, but there are mix of what we wanted before and what we want and what we want really hard to do here.
Cool. So let me try to do this.
Share.
So we decided to start. We decided to start with this image from 1967, 66. It's an image of the museum building being built by Afonso Regi, who's one of the most important Brazilian modernist architects, maybe not as known as others, and which is characterized by a style which is very different from what is known as Brazilian modernism. So it escapes that tropical modernism image that has maybe become a cliche, and I think that, and we like that. I mean, we like the fact that it's not bringing in the things that maybe are brought to mind immediately when you think about, you know, culture or cultural history in the country. And this part of the building was the second part of the building. The first part, which is behind us, was built in the 50s. Then this one was in the 60s. And then there was another one in the 2000s. But the museum was founded before. It was founded in the 40s. And it was founded on the model of modern art museums from the US. It seems, I mean, being super brief and simplifying a bit too much. MAM Rio, like MAM Sao Paulo, like the MASP, like the Biennial of Sao Paulo, are institutions, are private institutions funded on an American model or US model that is based on patronage. It's not a system of culture based on state support. And this continues until today, and this very much shapes what we can do, what we can't do, or what we are dealing with or having to deal with. MAM today is, Rio is a museum that is a private non-for-profit institution with a council that is operates on the basis of fundraising. I mean, there's rental for spaces and such, but also on tax incentive donations from enterprises.
This is very important to understand how culture and art world lives and keep going here in Brazil. It's interesting around this picture because it's a dream inside of a dream. It's a project inside of a project. Because this building, I don't know if you all know or see pictures around, this building is inside of a park. And this park was made by Lotta, another architect, and she was inside of thinking around how can build a way to live, better ways to live. So the modern way of thinking that time was something wrong that we can understand that we don't have the politics around this name, but it's around the politics way of living. How can we live together? How can we connect together? And we start to study not only this building, but this dream. what is the proposal for the city, for the country, for the world, doing this in Rio, and with this view and with this understanding.
Yeah. This park is the Aterro Park. I mean, it's a listed site. It was coordinated by Lotte, but also with garden design by Burle Marx, and Reiji was also the designer of the buildings or constructions in the park. And it's, I mean, they say it's the biggest listed maritime park, urban maritime park in the world. I mean, these comparisons of size are never that interesting, but it's a super interesting construction itself. It reshaped in the 1950s the city center, and it was one of the multiple or the sequential redesigns of the landscape of the city. I mean, Rio is a city that is characterized by it's one of the most maybe photographed landscapes. I mean, everybody maybe knows or has an image of Rio in their heads, even if they've never been here. But at the same time, this landscape is a constructed landscape. And even though this park is an amazing park, it's also the result of process of destruction. And it also has politics of inclusion and exclusion, which are very much part of our daily lives.
Yes, and what we can see, what it shows, and what around the destruction in Rio, and not only this side of the city, but the whole city, how the city was constructed. And it's very interesting how can we could get what we don't have inside of story. And that's why we can start to say around what we start to plan to become artistic directors in this specifically place here in MAM, because thinking around modern art is not only one way to think. We are now in MAM, that's why sometimes you can hear some noises with airplanes or boats or people screaming. And this is a project, this is a Lotte, Burle Marx, Hiji, and another architect's project. This is a proposal for the city that what we have inside of here is completely connected with what is happening outside, not only with view, but the weather, the light. We are working hard to understand how the sun can be our friend, to think around the art pieces.
Yeah, I mean, the architecture of the building is this openness. Imagine the Neue Nationalgalerie in Berlin, Mies van der Rohe, in which the walls are windows. There's basically no walls. And this happens here, but the location is not that in Berlin, which is also maybe beautiful. I mean, here is a location that is dealing with the Pau de Açúcar, with the Guanabara Bay, with Niterói on the other side, and with the city on the left side, the city center.
In the airport.
And the airport. I mean, it's not only a metaphor for connection, it's basically a structure that forces you to work with connection. And somehow, when we entered in the competition to work in the museum, we actually wrote a project that actually demanded that this openness, this connection would be reactivated, because throughout the years, the museum, both physically and symbolically, had cut off this connection. Big walls had been built inside the museum that blocked the windows, in order to protect art, to protect modern art from the light, but also from the world. And also
from the museum, proposal too.
Yeah, exactly, contradicting the proposal. And also the museum had cut itself off, but maybe the museum had never made the connection with the city and with populations. The museum remained a museum for artists, and that means a museum for middle-class people, and that means a museum for white people. And so the museum that we applied to be part of, to be part of to be these directors, was a museum that had somehow betrayed the spirit of the project. I know what it is. The helicopter is here on top. No, it's on top of the the airport, which is next door, because Flamengo, the team, is
yes,
flying
soccer
today
team.
because tomorrow is the final game of the league, and they are
oh my gosh,
contenders.
I just forgot
So we
this.
may have noise for the whole talk.
Sorry, but around that's it. We are inside of the city at all. But this thinking that we have, that Pablo was saying, is something around how can we show these limits that our thinking can have. Not to say that, oh, this is only for white people, only made by white people, only choose by white people, but all right, this is what we have and what we can do with this limit. How can we open, how can we use this limit to understand what can we do now? It's around programmation, it's around the museum, it's around the collections. We have 4 different collections here. We have inside of us, we have theater, cinema theater, and with a huge historical collection, and what we call historical collection too. What we choose as a society and to show, and what we choose as a society to don't show and forget, and maybe build one discourse that made some living things, living words, living just doesn't not exist. Sorry, we're just trying to close more the windows. Better. Thank you, Pablo. And how this limits made us to understand what is easy, what is hard, what is secret.
Yeah. And I think that's basically this image here shows a bit of what we a methodological approach, which doesn't summarize everything, but that shows a bit of a. What do we do here? We had the floor plan, the map of the Parque da Terra, which is that fantastic modernist project, referenced, historicized, right? And we are working in a modern art museum. We made a pact to come inside of it. But we know that those histories are histories of violence, histories of continued violence, and the histories that hide and ban other types of knowledges and practices. And what we want to do is somehow do several operations that don't fix this. I mean, there's no fixing, there's no compensation, there's no reparation. There is only ways of working out things that show what happened in order to allow for something else to happen. We're talking a lot about these things, and how several things, changing processes and methodologies is as important as changing contents. The absence of bodies, maybe indigenous bodies, maybe women's bodies, maybe black bodies in the collection, for example, is not solved by buying, acquiring works by some indigenous people. There's no way, we shouldn't attempt to do something that makes it appear that things are resolved. We need to do some things that actually go in different directions while keeping the history. And so looking back and forth, and looking in every direction and in different depths is what we want to do. And somehow this map, it's another map. This is a map by indigenous people from Acre. Acre is a territory on the border of Brazil with Bolivia. It's a Brazilian territory with a lot of indigenous population there. It shows us another way of understanding territory, that we want to impose an overlap and bring to these territories that we are inheriting, and use these new understandings of territory to reconfigure the territory where we live, where we work, and where we have to be every day.
And around that, we put this another picture with Faiga Ostroe, which is a woman that was very, very important here. And one piece of art that shows in the Abdias Nascimento book, named Sortilégio. It's around the lucky and around how Africa and the influence of African bodies can make and build knowings and connections around the art, not only art, but around the world, around the culture. And what Pablo said around that bodies that wasn't there before, and how can we work with this, is very connected when I said around the limits. We want to understand more the limits that we have here with the very intense Eurocentric white living, but it's Brazil. We still in Brazil. We are completely connected with European language. Of course, we speak Portuguese, but we are mixed with indigenous Africans influences. But we want to show that this happens. We want to have with us, we want to have not only buying, but working with people that are alive now and understand how it is to be invisible in this world and still wanting to work with art. Because when we say art, we are Eurocentric, I'm sure. And say that art can be one very strong decolonizing process. Sometimes I agree, but often I don't agree, because we're still working with Eurocentric white forces to make us stronger. When I say us, even being a Black woman, I ask myself as a creator. I'm artistic director with Pablo. So I have white forces inside of me. So I want to, with Pablo and with our team and our way of working, understanding more how can we understand our limits and open more the possibilities to put another ways of thinking inside of us and made us better, not made African, diasporic, or indigenous better. We are doing better when we understand that we have limits and can open and break these structured limits.
One of the methodologies to do that we, besides, process of bringing different people to work in the museum, people to work permanently and temporarily, is also to bring different ways of looking into the museum with these people. One thing that is at the same time quite simple and quite complicated that we try to do, the art context historically, the institutional Western art context historically has been very good at incorporating practices, cultural practices, and people from other contexts, and including them within a grammar that is pre-given by the epistemologists and the conceptual networks of art of that very European world. We started something that we started before, but as professionals, but we are trying to strategize here as a way of working is how different understandings of this word art from different cultural contexts, which may be, for example, Guarani or maybe Yoruba, and that may mean that it's a different word, that may mean that word might have a different semantic field. How these different views can be applied in the Museum of Art to objects that may be from those cultures, but also from the culture of Western art. And Western art includes also Brazilian art, yes, from a specific tradition, including Lydia Clark or Itisika. So this operation of trying to implement different perspectives on practice and on what practice means is a strategy that we're going to be developing for the next months, for the next years, as long as we are allowed to be here.
Yes.
Or as long as we can have energy to stay here, which, I don't know what's going to be first. But But for example, I mean, this picture of Diaz that is there, this picture of the book of Diaz. Diaz is a playwright. He's an artist. He's an activist. He passed away. He was the founder of the Black Theater. He was many things, and he also he collected he made a collection of Black arts, which is here in Rio. It's outside. It's an independent collection, and bringing this with us, with other collections, and trying to articulate that with our collections, with the epistemologies of the other collections, to figure out and to think about how do collections get assembled, and what other ways we can think about deassembling and assembling collections. How can we rethink the construction of heritage, and not only the heritage of modern art, which we are supposed to represent, but also the other histories, and actually throw one against the other in order to actually rethink again.
Yes, and understanding these ways of building thinkings around art. It's a very fine example that we have. We started in September, and of course we already have one legacy to keep it before we start to put more our hands inside of all concepts of the exhibitions. And we received one huge exhibition around Hélio Oiticica, Brazilian artist, Carioca, an artist from Rio, and but this exhibition was in MASP, was in São Paulo, and came from Rio. So we start to understand how can we receive this. What we have one exhibition that talk around dance and talk around way Hélio Oiticica could understand the samba and the living around dance and samba schools. And specifically one samba school, which is Mangueira, that he was a dancer inside of the samba school. So we start to understand how can we, as thinkers, as the creator, can be together inside of this exhibition and receive this here in this building in Rio and downtown. We are in downtown in Rio, and how can we invite samba's thinking and understanding how samba can be a school, how the pedagogies or the strategies around learning process can be made and amplified around samba. So we asked from Leandro Vieira to understand with us, Leandro, which is, how can I say carnavalesco?
Carnavalesco is the person who does the visual choreography, the whole choreography of the samba school parade.
Yes, it's like the artistic director of
yes,
the samba,
exactly.
the samba school.
Yeah.
Inside of the samba school parade, and we asked him to be our invited creator to understand this. So we have one huge exhibition with a huge piece of art that was made for a parade. That is a flag with six with 10 meters, pink and green, that is the colors of the school, inside of the exhibitions. And around that, we made a symposium around thinking how samba can work and how samba can learn, how samba can make us understand more the world around performing. And this weekend we had one wonderful talk with one wonderful woman, Helena Tenorio, that told us that African dance made the body as an agency of proposals, because it's alive itself, it's the time itself that moves and makes the thinking around the movement. So when the African body, Afro-diasporic, Afro-kidnapped, I prefer to say kidnapping, Afro-kidnapped bodies work is how that we claim and have our download of history and thinking only inside of some movements. So this is something that we are doing now around what we have and what we can do.
I think it's so, I mean, it was, as Keyna said, it was something very fastly done. I mean, we arrived, there's an exhibition ready, the exhibition is coming, it's curated. We are not going to undo that. But we thought, how can we receive this, make sense of it? And how can we receive this without replicating the narrative, the perspective of art? Because we always hear the voice of Oiticica being replicated, saying how everything changed in his life when he became a Mangueira dancer, how he, you know, revolutionized his practice, and then the Parangoles came. We said, like, enough of listening to Oiticica. I mean, and that enough is metaphorical. Enough of listening to what the official artists, recognized artists say. Enough of recognizing what with the authorized voices say. Let's see, if Mangueira is important, let's talk to Mangueira to see what are the knowledges of Mangueira. What is the knowledge that Mangueira has as a school? And how these ancestral knowledges can be shared within the museum. How can the museum be a place where these knowledges come in if they want to? I mean, we invited them, they wanted to, and it's a small capsule of a type of work that we will want to do, we'll continue to do. I mean, the collection has works by, from Max Bill to Tarsila Damarao to Lydia Clark, to many people who are in the books of official books of history.
Accidental work.
It's okay, they are there. I mean, we're not going to burn them, and the museum already burned in 1978. And it's not an exercise of iconoclasm what we want to do. I mean, we want to somehow rearrange things by introducing things that force that rearrangement.
Yes.
And the idea of a school is also important. I mean, the picture on the left is another story of Brazilians. I mean, she's a woman born in Poland that comes to Brazil as a poor immigrant at the age of 4 or 5.
Yes.
And eventually becomes an artist.
This is very important because Faiga came with his family in a whitening politic process that we had here in Brazil.
Yeah.
Because Brazil was very brown for the politician that way. So we have poor Europeans coming here, Asians coming here and understanding how can build again Brazil, invited, and had a very, very hard conditions to live to.
Yes.
Not slavery, of course, but very almost slavery conditions to live, but as a constant and strong program to make Brazil whiter.
Exactly, and she's part of that movement, and then she eventually becomes an artist with difficulties and an outspoken woman, which also involves, which brings difficulty into yourself, and then she became one of the most important teachers within the school block, which is actually that first building of the museum that I mentioned before. The first part of the museum that is built is something called the school block. So the museum was born as a school, as a place where pedagogy was the main or one of the key activities. That school block was eventually deactivated, and part of our project is to bring back this idea of the museum's school. And Mangueira, the people from Mangueira who were here sharing their knowledges with us, was the first step in the activation of the museum as a school. And these are the type of knowledges that we want this school to share. So somehow, I think that all these operations sum up a bit of what we managed to do until now, and that we want to further into the future. This is an image of the building finished as it is today. The building is beautiful. It's falling apart. I mean, we don't have the luxury of the Pompidou closing for 3-4 years. It's not going to happen. We keep open and keep going. And I think that maybe.
Yes, it's around something that we can show our faces.
Yeah, that's me. Let's see if I can.
Just wait 1 second and put the camera. Yes.
Yeah.
And then after see that building and everything around our talk, have one very important and strong word, Brazilian word, that is ginga, that it's around something that it's very important, because ginga is a Brazilian word that means fight and dance in the same word. It's not fight and dance separately, it's something together. When Pablo said that we cannot close for 3 years to rebuild what is wrong, because we can't do this, not only because it's a luxury, but it's impossible to think that we can close some place around the culture, some place that needs to be open. So we need to fight and dance to be together, and understanding how can we use our work to build, open the limits, or made more, how can I say, nítido?
Yeah.
Because I want to be clear or clarify.
More explicit,
more explicit,
more articulate, more
the limits that we have here. But we talked a lot. We want to open for questions, and we want to thank.
Yeah, we just had a question from Vija, I think. Can you elaborate on your proposal for MAM? What is your vision? They are asking.
We kind of talked a bit about that. I mean, when the selection process involves various stages and by several interviews. And we wrote first a 2-page proposal, then a 50-page proposal. And now, as Keyna said, I mean, when we look at that, it seems like some things are there, no?
Yes.
And some things don't make any sense. I mean, institutions, I mean, you all work, I mean, I don't know, you all work in institutions, or I guess all of us are part of institutions, but, you know, some of these big institutions are not transparent at all, and then you can't see until you really get in. And there's some things that we're discovering that make us wait, because we have to fix things before we do other things. I mean, the vision. I mean, we also don't. You can't say the vision in 3 sentences. I mean, that's.
The vision is around to show, because our proposal wasn't to explode the museum. We want to keep it. We want to work with. We want to know more around the collections and doing things inside of there, and then we want to be inside of the building and understand how the light can work with. We want to make more. We want to show more this place, and we want to make this. We want to different problems for this place. You know, like how the outside can be inside. When we say outside, is the people that are outside. How can we can work together in pandemic world that we have now? Because we cannot say post-pandemic. We don't know where this is gonna end, and how can we work together? How can I take out my mask and be together with Pablo to work together? And how can we think this huge building, which is better because we have a lot of space to bring people here?
I think that there's something, I mean, this thing about working to make institutions function and not implode is something that means different things in Europe or from here. I mean, you can think of, you know, whatever, the self-maintenance of institution is a power structure, you know, go for Claudian. That, I mean, here, what is easiest is for institutions to implode. The colonial structure that continues is one that actually forces institutions in the colonized countries to implode. I mean, the fact that the National Museum burned 4 years ago is not a coincidence. The destruction is part of the system, So making the institutions, avoiding that implosion or that fire or that explosion is actually some kind of weird urgent task.
Yes.
It's interesting that. So I mean, burning the art that was forced from Europe into here is actually for us not interesting. You know, that's too easy. That happens already. It happened in 1978. It could have happened last month. We managed to avoid it. We had to change the whole electrical system,
This
which
is
hadn't
a
been
secret.
changed for 50 years. So that's interesting. I mean, so weirdly, maintenance of structures that allow for other things is a super urgent task. It's just not. So that's one vision. And this other one of like opening, you know, with, I mean, talking about open institutions, I mean, discourses are kidnapped by, you know, by different interests. But I mean, having a museum which actually connects with communities, and communities will mean something very different here than when we come in London, obviously.
Yes.
Is another. I mean, making this place not implode in order to actually make it possible to make connections. I think that may be whatever, I don't know.
Yes, yes. Our request is understanding how this museum can be one kind of media.
I liked the I think, I'm not sure this was a terminology, but I understood as a kind of looking at exhibitions as ways of investigating and displaying different epistemologies, so different ways of thinking about art. You mentioned what art might mean for Guarani or Yoruba, etc. And I had a question about this kind of, I'm not sure if it's a coincidence or if it's intentional. I mean, you mentioned the two. You mentioned the Mangueira exhibition as an example of this different epistemology, kind of from the kind of standard art kind of perspective. But and you also mentioned a kind of a critique, which I completely agree, of Wojtysica as kind of representing the culture of Mangueira by proxy, kind of. So I'm wondering how coincidental the two are, if it was intentional or just a coincidence that these two events, exhibitions, are held at the same time.
If it's coincidence that we are here in the Wojtysica exhibition?
And the Mangueira.
No, we brought the Mangueira because of.
Yeah.
Okay.
We invited Mangueira, the School of Samba, and this artistic director from Mangueira to think around art and how a samba school is a school, is a learning program, a process of learning program that we have, that we do not call it.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think is very interesting around what we say, when we work around another epistemological way of thinking, to be more, the thinking around art sometimes doesn't exist. So we choose to call piece of art something that is not that for that community, for that nation, or for that way of thinking. And sometimes it's very violent. Call that manto tupinambá is art, because that piece of fabric or that sculpture is something or someone or something that we don't have a language to say it, and we call it art, and we kidnap and we put inside of the museum. So sometimes we want to think with people that have this learning process that is so different and so huge, rich and important, that made us understand that you can call art, I can call art, but this is not art.
I have a few questions coming in on the chat box. I think this might be related to the discussion. There's, I think it's Judah, who's curious about the term African bodies and whether this has become institutionalized in the arts of Brazil, and whether you could like, they continue. Does this exclude the agency of people of African descent, etc.?
I'm sorry, I could not understand.
It's in the chat if you want to check, but they're wanting you to discuss the term African bodies and whether this has become institutionalized, the term within the arts in Brazil.
African body, and has this become institutionalized with the artists in Brazil? Yes, I'm talking around how this was made before the historical process to put Africans' bodies or kidnapped Africans, Afro-diasporic bodies as part of the agency to understand how can we say that this is right. You know, like this institution is better because we have this collection is better because you have one sculpture from Benin. One. And so you institutionalize this and made this better and call it something that is not made by of thinking around art and call it art. Is this something that I want to talk and I want to show? Because as Black, Afro-diasporic, Afro-kidnapped body from my family, from my ancestors, I can say that I work hard to don't build my constitution and my intelligence and my intellectuality only in the Eurocentric way of thinking. So I'm not thinking only with my split body that makes my brain separate of the rest of my body. Understand what the way I move and the way I dress and the tone that I put in our talks made us different kind of people, different kind of things.
And there's something that, I mean, something to add something to that. I mean, the racial politics, as we know, operate very differently in different places. No, and the discourses, the words are very different. And even here in Brazil, the discussion of racial politics within the Black, Afro-Brazilian population and indigenous population is very different.
Yes.
And I think that navigating these differences is complicated. One thing that we're trying to do very much so is to change the makeup of the museum. As we said, I mean, it was a museum with only one type person working almost, or two types, but in different classes. No, I mean, there's the not administration, the building, the basic administration, and then there is the creative teams. And this is changing. I mean, this changed quite a lot since you know, for the last year and a half. And this actually brings different people. And, you know, talking about bodies is important because, I mean, in here, so the place is discussion of what a body brings. I mean, a body doesn't only, a person is not only some kind of idea. I mean, the materiality of the presence is fundamental in many places, but, you know, talking for us only here, I mean, this is part of the discussion. So that's something that I think that is being brought in with this term African bodies. The idea is that the bodies are not here representing a group. What they are allowed in because they have to be allowed in because they're asking to be in, and then this creates different dynamics from the ones that were here in the past because these people also bring different perspectives on practice, on life, and this is something that is some kind of urgent task again here. I mean, we can't talk about, you know, what is needed here. What for us is an urgent demand.
There's lots of questions which I'm kind of trying to kind of summarize here.
Well, Mariela spelled it right, Ginga.
I'm looking at Giulia Casalini, who is looking at that. I'll just read it. You said that there are no public funding for the arts in Brazil, so the museum needs to rely on sponsorship. How do you think you can keep on bringing the radical content you're talking about, i.e. reaching those bodies that have not been included in the arts, and having to compromise with bringing in the funding for the museum?
We need to have in all the places, we need to accept invitations, talk with a lot of language, and have a lot of connections. A lot. We need to work hard to make sense for more people and and build inside of us. We have one institutional director, which is Lucimara Letelier, that made us understand how can we build this connection. As artistic directors, we can build many ways of be connected with so many thinkings and make this be interesting and explore the way of thinking to bring more eyes, more visions around here.
Yeah, I mean, but so to correct, but it's not that there is no public funding. There are state museums, very few and very underfunded, but they exist. There are public bodies of funding that have been they've never, well, I mean, there's been different policies in different governments. The current government has strangled cultural funding, and as they've strangled research, scientific research funding, and many other things. And when I talk about us being paid by tax incentive money, that's public money.
This is public too.
The money doesn't go from the company to the government and then from the government to the institution, but it's money that the company gives to the museum because they don't pay taxes. So that's actually public money, but it's not distributed centrally. That has its problems, but I think it's interesting because today in Brazil, and I don't want to paint, I don't want to paint a horrible picture or not. I mean, actually, having money from companies, from some companies, is less heavy than money from the government. If you are in a state museum today in Brazil, there'll be some things that you are not allowed to talk about. There is a reaction against issues of I don't know how even to call it. I mean, nudity, some types of behavior being chased by some governmental bodies within their spaces. We don't have that. So I mean,
I think the question was looking
at quite blurry, and so it's, and I think that it's weird. I mean, we don't think that we are being hindered by the people who just agreed to give us the money. We'll see. I mean, we just arrived.
Yes.
We managed to fundraise quite a lot on the basis of the discourse that we're telling you, which is not a complacent discourse. Actually, I mean, we are actually much more articulate in Portuguese than in English, and I think that we actually received a lot of support for the ideas that we're going to bring, and we hope it continues. So that's a curious.
Yes, and it's very important to understand that we are a group of directors. We have our president, executive director, and institutional director, and artistic director. We are four working together to understand how can we build this project. We are not alone. Of course, we are not alone because we already are two, but we are not alone with this project. We came with the process of changing ways of doing here in the museum. This museum was with a very huge needing to little but strong changings. So we are in this movement that the executive director and the institutional director is starting before us. That's why we are here too.
While we're still in the question of the structure of the museum, I have another question from Paula Terra, asking about the school aspect of within the original plan and the idea of kind of renewing. I'll just read it quickly. I heard many points already manifested as your plans to rehabilitate the art school, bring new lights into the collection, allowing what was in the background to come up front, the inclusiveness, thinking on how to incorporate new technologies, but there will be the need to happen to adapt the dream to the museum, to the reality of the museum that exists as a building, as a corporation collection, but to rehumanize the museum. I think it was more a comment than
yes, I completely agree. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting comment, Paula. Yes, we knew that we need to work hard to be, but harder to stay. And I completely agree. We are working hard, and again, we are together with some people that was here before and some people that are coming after us to understand how can we move and put more movements inside of this museum.
Yeah,
and we are here as we are not here forever. We will be here for a time. Can be short, can be longer, but not for our whole life. And so we are here to understand and to put a kind of legacy that can bring more doors open, more cracks inside of the structure to not allowed, but to understand that we can do many things.
I have a couple more questions. One is a kind of very general question about how the museum relates to the kind of the wider political situation in Brazil, the incursions into indigenous lands, and the kind of general extractive capitalism of the current kind of governing bodies.
It's the indigenous issues in Brazil are super complex, and I mean the indigenous lands were recent demarcations. I mean, what is it called indigenous lands in here?
No, it's just.
So I can go back to the. It's responsible recognized by the. By actually dictatorship government and then later in the democracy. And it's like extractive capitalism is a colonial process that began in 1500 in Brazil. No?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's a continuous process that actually is fostered by the colonial powers that actually buy the stuff. No? I mean, the companies that are doing this are Norwegian companies and French companies and Dutch companies.
British.
Brazilian companies that sell it to the wood that is cut in the Amazon or here. I mean, it's much more the Amazon. It's too expensive. It's sold to Europe. So I think that and these things have to be reminded. I mean, it's not only that the colonial process enriched Europe and made the rest of the world poor, is that it continues to happen. I mean, this is not, it hasn't stopped. So responsibility is not even past responsibility, it's present responsibility. The soy is a huge issue here, as much in Paraguay, in Bolivia. And soy is advancing super fast. The soy is sold out. It's not consumed here. It's sold out to Europe and to China also. So the world is complicated. And I think that, fighting, you don't fight, we're not going to stop that from the museum. But I think that this ways in which we work out this rearranging of relations, we and our teams, we do have many close professional connections with indigenous activists. Indigenous activism in Brazil is complicated. There's very different territories and very different strategies.
Yes, because we have cities, rural, forest movements, different, and they all are important and all are indigenous. And be concerned and be angry around the things is not enough. And we want to understand how our size can make understand this kind of connection that we can do. We are talking around art. We are a museum. I know that public politics is something very huge, strong, and each one of us have a very strong understanding around what is happening. But as artistic directors, we want to have with us work with indigenous intelligences, indigenous learning process, with indigenous nations, different nations, because inside of Brazil, should call it the United Nations of Brazil, because we have a lot of nations here. And we have a lot of indigenous, important and strong nations. And as artistic directors inside of this building, for this short time that I don't know if it'll be short or long, we want to work with, we want to try to understand, we want to understand what they think around color, what they think around texture, what they think around sculptures, and because sometimes it's easy to think that what another culture that is not European culture made something to exist forever, like we think around art. That's something that need to exist forever. But around that, sometimes some cultures don't think around that, because don't think around to be forever in the place, because don't think around that in the same way. So the experience to be alive and what to do is completely different. This is important to learn and to spread, and sometimes betrayed and translate, as we are doing now. Because I don't speak many languages. I speak few languages, and all my language that I know is European. Me and Pablo wants to learn one indigenous language. I want to learn one African language, but learn a language is learning how to live differently.
I think, going back to that, I think that we will have, and we've invited, we have indigenous people in the team. We have indigenous people in the mentorship of the residency program. We have actually many indigenous artists in the exhibitions to come. Actually, many more than the people said percentage of self-declared indigenous people in Brazil. We're not trying to do quotas either. And these people will bring whatever they want to bring as individuals. We're not asking them to bring in a political stance in relation to the occupation of land by farmers. And I think that that's important. I think that bringing people with the perspectives without setting imposing on them a way of articulating the way that an institution positions itself in relation to the wider world. I mean, the paths are multiple, and we want to actually create those possibilities for those paths here. I mean, the residency program, we didn't talk about it. I mean, we're going to have 5 residency programs this year. One
that starts today.
one oriented to curatorial practice, another to art practice, another to practices of accessibility for people with this. I can't remember how this you say in English. In Portuguese, you say disabilities.
With disabilities, we say in Portuguese.
And another one with teenagers, another one of teachers. So all these people in different lengths of times are going to spend time with us, with processes of formation, but also process of proposals of modifications of the museum.
It's a learning process, very intense.
Which is going to continue throughout. I mean, we want to have people here for a period of time being paid to tell us how to do things. And many of these are indigenous too.
Yes.
And I think that those are processes that will take the institution somewhere, hopefully as quick as possible, but without us predetermining and having a stronghold on the direction. I think that this is very much part of.
And we won't live in bodies instead of body.
Yeah. Well, just as a way of kind of rounding up, I just had a kind of people mentioning, Catherine Thorpe mentioning that she really likes the term kidnap artwork, and Christina Hibas asking you whether the free entrance to the museum will change accessibility. But I thought that while you're talking about the museum and the kind of the wider history of extractivism, etc., in Brazil, and the kind of very kind of violent colonial past, which is still present. I mean, the past is present in Brazil. I kind of see a kind of a juxtaposition of different types of institutions. Some institutions that are kind of set up as a kind of a form of erasing a past, kind of, and I'm thinking, and maybe this isn't fair because I don't know that museum that well, but I see the Museum of the Future in the Cais do Valongo area. Do you know is that the Museum of the Future? What's it called? The Museum of Tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah, as a kind of project in which a past is erased, kind of the region and the kind of looking to the future is a form of kind of forgetting about the past. And other museums, like even the MA and MAM, although they're kind of focused on a particular kind of field, art or the city, etc., they are there. I see their function as a kind of a remembering and contextualizing pasts, whether they are problematic or particularly celebratory kind of moments. But there is a kind of a different types of museums that I see, and MAM in its kind of trajectory from a kind of copycat MoMA kind of
Yes.
format transformed itself into something very interesting through the kind of free kind of education projects and not necessarily by the formal arts kind of block, the education, the school block, but even in the kind of artists kind of doing events in the Aterro, in the region around it, and it has a very interesting history and this kind of necessity of reinventing itself from the fire in 1978, where most of the collection, when you couldn't go back to the MoMA format anymore because most of the collection went up in flames together with the Torres Garcia exhibition, etc. So it had to kind of reinvent itself, and maybe the format, this kind of private public kind of format, which it kind of adapted to following the fire. Maybe that format has kind of is now kind of needing kind of to be rethought in a kind of a more open kind of opening to the city, to the north side of the city, maybe.
No, yeah, I mean, Museu da Manhã responds to a different logic. I mean, it's a museum of the Olympics, you know. It's a museum that tried to, and I mean, there's moments, I mean, every country has moments of delusion, of realization, I mean, Brazil has gone through several of these in different, you know, in recent times, and that Museu da Manhã was a museum of the future, a time a few years ago when things were still looking okay for some, but you know, a certain image of the country was working, and actually meant many things were changing. No, I mean,
and was a huge and expensive museum, and very expensive to keep it, and was a public museum with private concerns, but it was a huge museum because we sometimes start to understand as a public politics that build more places are more important that keep the older. And this for us as a citizens was sometimes nice, but hard to keep it. Now the museum, Museum of Tomorrow, Museu da Manhã, is closed, only doing the work online, but it's struggling hard to be open, and because it started as a public space.
Yeah.
So it's very, because I know very strong the story of this museum, because I was in cultural secretary when this started. So I was watched very closely when the building of Museum of Tomorrow and MAR, the Museum of Art, Rio, from Rio, MAR, was built in the same government. It's nice, it's wonderful, but it's hard to keep it.
Yeah.
We are doing this. We know that it's hard. We had these questions around that, but
Okay.
we
I,
want
I,
to know how can we do this
yeah.
here.
I'm getting, I mean, there are some comments and congratulations and thank yous to you, but I'm being asked to kind of round up as we kind of have over. I didn't realize it was just 1 hour. I thought we could go a little bit over, but I'm being asked to round up the meeting. But I would like to thank you so much, and also congratulate you on the move to bring Mangueira in a completely new and different way, in a way in which it has agency, you know.
Yes.
One of my big critiques about how Oiticica has been kind of contextualized is that he kind of represents Mangueira by proxy, and Mangueira kind of through Oiticica doesn't really have much agency. And I really liked somehow the contradiction or the kind of well, it seemed like an exhibition of Oiticica coming from São Paulo to Rio seemed like one of these bars that imitates a São Paulo bar imitating a Carioca bar, you know, like the Astor. It seemed a little bit like that, kind of a São Paulo exhibition imitating a Rio exhibition kind of being imported to back to Rio. So it kind of felt a little bit strange in itself, and to bring Mangueira in and to look at the kind of Leandro, no, this is his name, Leandro
Vieira.
yeah, and the amazing Marielle flags and that was the from 2 years ago, right? That was fantastic, fantastic kind of curatorial kind of a move. So congratulations on that, and thanks so much. I mean, it would be great to meet up again and talk. And there's kind of lots of thank yous coming again. Huge congratulations, thank you. So everyone was really happy to listen to you, and I really hope to catch up soon. Yeah, online or hopefully in Rio itself.
Yes.
Last time I saw
For,
it was at Carnival last year.
yes, yes. I want more connections 4D. You know, like time, space, and touch.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And thanks so much. It was great. Great to
You're
meet you.
welcome.
Thank you for you all. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the questions. Was lovely. Thank you. Thank you.
And